I'd like to invite Mr. Nemo, please. A round of applause.
Hello, everyone. Let me see if this works. Okay. So, yeah, there's been a little bit of talk. It's nice to see mining taking a slightly larger share of ABC this year. Many of you have probably heard the news in the last few months. There's a lot of mining going on. So I just wanted to sort of put that in perspective and get the story out. What has happened in Ethiopia? And if you attended Eric's talks yesterday, you know about the role of Bitcoin mining in electrification. So really, I want you to think of this as Bitcoin and Ethiopia's journey to electrification. So first thing, oops. Oh, the green button, okay. Yeah, so let's start with a few seconds of geography and history. So Ethiopian highlands get a lot of rainfall, enormous amounts of rainfall. And, as I like to say, rainfall plus gravity equals potential energy, right? So we have big rivers flowing down from the highlands down to Kenya, Somalia, and famously down to the Mediterranean through the Nile. So there's a lot of potential things there. Unfortunately, these rivers are not navigable, again, because it's coming down steep mountains. So historically, they haven't been economically super valuable. Navigable rivers are, in much of the world have been really critical elements of economic development. So there is the legendary story of the Queen Makeda, the Queen of Sheba, traveled down the Nile to Jerusalem to meet King Solomon, and that was the founding of the Solomonic dynasty. But that is an exception, right? So we haven't really done much with our rivers, not even much irrigation for agriculture. But there is huge potential for hydroelectricity. So we're really just beginning to tap into this incredible resource that we have. And why is that an incredible resource? Well, electrification is a really big deal. I won't repeat too much of this, but 1 kilowatt hour of energy is about. And what these two charts show is that relationship kind of holds not just looking at different countries in the world at a particular moment in time, like the top chart there. So literally, you see this almost perfect correlation between amount of energy and the size of the economy. But it's also true if you look at any particular country over time. So if you go to our world in data and animate that chart, you'll see every country as it develops and incomes increase, they also move up the energy per capita chart. So really, energy is crucial to human flourishing. And in Ethiopia, as the numbers are pretty close to the average in Africa, about almost half of the population does not have electricity at home. And the GDP per capita is only $1,000 a year. So really, and energy is the key to improving both of those things. And so I'd say that there's no greater investment in humanity than helping electrification in Africa. So the good news is Ethiopia, just after centuries, decades of really not benefiting from this, is now beginning to really capitalize on it. The amount of electricity generated has tripled in the last 5 years. So it's if you just pause to think about it, that's a staggering rate of growth. Many people have heard of the biggest project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam on the Blue Nile. That's a huge, huge project, largest hydro dam in Africa, 6 gigawatts, cost $5 billion, not $5. But that's just one of many. There are several others. And overall, as you can see on this chart, we went from 2 to almost 6 in the last 5 years, and then 10 gigawatts in the next couple of years. But what you see there is that, and this is true throughout history, you can look at the United States, 150 or 120 years ago, or Europe, is that, you have a chicken and egg problem. You have to generate the energy, and then you have to deliver it. And transmission and distribution always lags generation development. And it's very, very expensive. So I mentioned the big dam costs $5 billion. To deliver the energy from the currently planned generation projects, Ethiopia would need another $10 billion, $8 to $10 billion, just to build a transmission and distribution infrastructure so that it can get to the people. So what that means is, as you can see, there's always a gap. As it's growing, eventually, when things stop growing and stabilize, then the consumption will eventually catch up to the generation. But as it's growing, there's always a gap. Consumption is growing, generation is growing, there's this big gap. This gap is what we call stranded energy. A generation capacity that exists, but that cannot be consumed. And in the meantime, if you can't consume that energy, if you can't make money from it, then there's a shortage of money to build the distribution infrastructure. So that's where Bitcoin mining comes in. It can fill that gap. Mining is location agnostic and time agnostic, so we can go where that excess is, unlike any other consumer, whether it's you're not going to move a city near a dam just because there's electricity, you're not going to build a factory in the middle of nowhere, but you can put miners in the middle of nowhere to take advantage of excess capacity. So my company is QRB Labs. In 2020, my co-founder and I realized, as Bitcoiners and Ethiopians, it's embarrassing to say it took us that long to realize that, but we finally clicked and said, hey, Ethiopia is actually one of the best places to mine Bitcoin in the world. Because, as I've just explained, if we can mine Bitcoin, we'll help accelerate the electrification of the country. That's great for the country. And for the global Bitcoin community, well, it would be great if we mine more in Africa, because it means we're more decentralized. That's great for the Bitcoin ecosystem's health. And third point is just naturally, the electricity in Ethiopia is pretty much all renewable, 98% renewable. So that means that the more mining we do there, the bigger the fraction of Bitcoin mining that can be considered green. So that's, again, another benefit for the Bitcoin community, because we know it often gets attacked on that through that vector. So we founded QRB Labs in 2021, and this was our plan. We say, okay, we're going to negotiate a power purchase agreement. We're going to put some data centers and miners, ... profit. But things turned out to be a little more difficult than we expected. It took us a little over 2 years to bring our first machine in. After we got the power purchase agreement and after we set up the company, and we thought everything was ready to go. And the reason is basically that the import became a new regulation that we hadn't expected. There's the government, well, part of the government said you can't bring these machines in. And this brings us to what I call the fundamental theorem of Ethiopian bureaucracy, that everything is forbidden unless explicitly allowed. So if you're a computer scientist or a programmer, most countries work in blacklist mode. Certain things will be banned, but If something is not banned, it's allowed. Ethiopia works in whitelist mode. It's like everything is banned, you're not allowed to do anything, and then we'll tell you what you can do. And this is a finite list of things. And it's really incredible to what extent that is the case. And the corollary to that is that at any time, something can be forbidden. So the challenges come from where you least expect it. So we, when we set out, we thought, okay, we have to convince the energy providers. That turned out to be pretty easy. We have to convince the fiat authorities, the Ministry of Finance, the central bank. That turned out to be pretty easy. And then the hard part turns out that they are importing these computers, which we never expected. We thought a computer is a computer. Who cares whether it's a laptop with a CPU or an ASIC? But that ended up being where the biggest challenge was, and it took us a good 2 years to get through that. So, it's Ethiopia as a whole, I think, is improving in every dimension. The economy is becoming freer every year. A couple of steps forwards, one step back. But the legacy of an unfree economy runs very, very, very deep in Ethiopia. I mean, I think 97% of Ethiopians have never known private property, right? We're a communist country deep down, even though the country is trying to liberalize very hard. So it's just, it requires a lot of patience, a lot of hard work, and, there is, if you try hard enough, you can achieve some results. So 2024 was finally the miraculous year where we went from 0 to 600 megawatts of Bitcoin mining in the country in about 10 months, or actually 9 months. This, it's made up of a bunch of companies. The first, there's 19 Chinese companies that have come in, one other company, and then us, the only Ethiopian companies. So, we worked hard for 3 years to open the door, and we're happy to see a lot of people walking in the doors that we opened. But there is some irony there. For a while, there was, again, referring to the previous slide of bureaucracy, there was unwritten or maybe written but unpublished secret rules that basically favored foreigners. So that was kind of really infuriating and difficult for us to say, like, wait, the playing field is uneven, and it's harder for us as Ethiopians to do it than for foreigners. And still, even now, every step always requires asking permission. Every time you bring a machine, every time you do something. So it's still very difficult. There's the potential tax uncertainties in the future. And there's a lot of, electricity generation is a government monopoly. So there's risks, and electricity has not been a free market product in the past in general. So there's always a risk that politics interferes in pricing. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But again, bottom line, at least we got started. And Ethiopia now accounts for 2.5% of the world's Bitcoin mining hash rate. From 0, so yeah, I just want to talk about some of the dangers, though, going forward. We do talk a lot about the positive side, and that's, that's the good thing about Bitcoin, is it can really have an enormous positive impact on the energy infrastructure. But electricity is complicated. And even today in Ethiopia and in many countries, there's places where in the grid where you have too much power and places where you have too little. If you live in Addis Ababa, if the biggest city, you'll experience power outages. There is too little power in many urban areas. So the Bitcoin miners, depending on where we go, we can help or hurt the situation. We can stabilize or destabilize the grid. And the key to avoiding that problem is that the pricing of the energy has to align the incentives of the miners with the benefit of the country. And so stranded energy should be cheap, so that we can get all the good stuff that we were just talking about. And non-stranded energy should be more expensive. So that, the pricing should be location-based at the minimum, or ideally even real-time supply and demand-based. Without that, there can be some serious problems. Beyond just the grid stability, I think there is a potential ugly side of Bitcoin mining that we should acknowledge. One is that, like everywhere in the poor world, third world, bribery and bureaucracy form a vicious cycle, right? The more bureaucracy there is, the more tempting it is to just say, I'll just pay somebody off and get through this problem. But then the more bribery there is, the more regulations will be added to either control that or to take advantage of that. So that adds more bureaucracy, and then that creates more opportunity. It's a really vicious cycle that can really doom a country and an economy. Second thing, particular to Bitcoin, and this has happened in some countries, is theft of energy, like literally theft. There's countries where Bitcoin miners go and just take electricity for free. They pay people off. That's theft. Or they pay below the true value because they've got connections in the power providers. And, what that means is that the Bitcoin network is benefiting at the expense of the people, right? And so we really don't want that to be happening, right? The third is we're starting to hear a lot of that in Ethiopia. It's exciting to see nation states adopt Bitcoin. So people are like, the government should start mining. That would be great. Government stacking sats, Bitcoin reserve, etc. But that's to me very dangerous, because it creates a system where it's very tempting, because when you're mining, as a government, you get cash, right? It's like immediate cash flow positive. But if you're also the government that owns the power generation, then it's tempting to not pay the real value, right? To not value the opportunity cost of that electricity. So if I am a government official and I'm saying, well, I can tell the power company to just put the electricity, it's free electricity, and just mine Bitcoin, what you're really doing in that case is taking power that's worth 5 or 10 cents per kilowatt hour and that people need in their homes, and using it for an activity that's maybe worth 4 cents or 3 cents, right? Because you're not paying the true value. So the true cost is hidden, but you're getting cash. That's a very dangerous situation for a government to be in, because essentially what you end up doing is the government profits, the Bitcoin network benefits, but the people are subsidizing. So we don't want African citizens subsidizing the Bitcoin network, right? We want the reverse. And also, more subtly, it can be a misallocation of capital, right? Like, so if you take Ethiopia, let's say the government wanted to mine a gigawatt, it would be $1 billion worth of miners. I'm a Bitcoiner, I love mining, but I don't want if the government is going to spend $1 billion, I would rather spend $1 billion on water and sewage and electricity transmission. So I think it can be a serious misallocation of capital, but again, it's tempting. So all of this together, you've probably heard this expression, the resource curse. Many countries, including in Africa, have oil wealth, and the oil wealth ends up being a curse, creates political problems, bad governance, corruption, and you go to those countries that have enormous wealth and the people are poor. That's the resource curse, right? So we want to make sure electricity doesn't turn into a resource curse. And we as Bitcoiners need to do the right thing to make sure that it is a blessing and not a curse. So final slide here. I'll leave some lessons for Bitcoiners that from what we've learned, especially miners. So I don't see any kids in the audience here, so I'll use some colorful language. My first rule is don't shit where you eat. Right? If you do, you get cholera. And this is the same thing with mining. If you want to invest in a country and help develop the electrification and help develop mining, don't engage in corruption. You're ruining the environment that you are ostensibly helping. So let's make sure mining is a blessing. And then for foreign investors, don't piss on my head and tell me it's raining. In other words, there's a tendency to say, well, this is Africa and whatever, things work this way and we're just going to do what's necessary. If you do that, you're kind of contributing to the problem you're complaining about. So again, as foreigners, please help make it a better place, don't contribute to problems. And final thing is if you're starting a Bitcoin mine, don't forget to slaughter a sheep. We failed to do that and we paid the price.